So this is something that is totally different, although for a lot of people it does involve the leveraging of loans or credit. And it's something that you'd mentioned earlier and are very open about on your social media. You and your partner Joseph have been kind of on an IVF journey, as they say, for how long now?
I guess you could say a little over about a year. About a year.
About a
Yeah.
year. And you guys you have two children.
Yes.
And this would be your third, and it's, as I think you said, your third round of IVF.
Yeah, so it's actually, it's funny. So IVF has two parts. There's the retrieval part where they actually take out the eggs and fertilize them and potentially freeze them. And then there's the implantation part. So it's possible to do multiple rounds of part one before you move on to part two. And then it's possible to do multiple rounds of part two without ever going back to part one. So we did 3 retrievals last year, and then we just did our embryo transfer of our one and only embryo, a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago.
Wow. Can you choose the gender? Do you know the gender?
I do.
But you don't have to share.
Okay.
Oh my gosh. But that is so interesting that you know the gender. Oh.
Well, we only have one, so.
Yeah, no, totally. So I'm so curious about so many elements of that process because I think let's just say it. Women are having kids later in life now. That's just kind of a reality, particularly for, urban millennial professional women. I don't know what the average age is now, but I think it's like closer to 32 than 31, which is like, I mean, biologically, you're like 1 foot in the grave.
Basically, yeah.
And it's tough because I feel like that is almost a taboo thing to say at some point because I think we have this strange relationship to our own bodies, I think, as we live longer lives and as we have different lives than we used to. For most women, it's like not really been many generations that you had much of a choice in this matter. So I feel like it's almost like we feel like we can will it away somehow. And I think that for a lot of women who are coming to the realization that they may not be able to conceive naturally or not on the timeline that they want, there's so much mystery around the IVF process. And so I'm curious, first of all, if you can kind of walk us through what that looks like financially and what that process really entails, what someone should know if they're considering it.
Sure. So I would say that, first of all, IVF is not necessarily the first step. IVF is the last step, and there are other less invasive interventions that you can try beforehand. Like there are things where you can just take medication to help you ovulate, and then you can go home and try naturally. There is intrauterine insemination where you take medication to ovulate, and then the sperm is put in like a turbocharged solution and manually injected in the hopes that the egg will fertilize. And so we did several rounds of IUI. And this was actually before we had our son. So our son Reeves, it took us 3 years to conceive him.
And he was conceived through IUI.
He was conceived naturally, actually.
Look at that.
Yes, it was crazy. So over the course of those 3 years, it took us 18 months to conceive the first time, and that ended in a miscarriage. And then 18 months later, we got pregnant with Reeves. But we actually were not expecting to get pregnant because we tried 6 rounds of IUI and did not get pregnant. So we decided to move to the DC area because the insurance, like New York, the insurance mandate requires insurance to cover IVF as under the fertility coverage for health insurance. So that's why we moved to DC. And, so we both got new jobs, we're house hunting, and then we discover we're pregnant. So we didn't have to use IVF, but then 4 years later, 3 years later, we weren't able to conceive again. So we decided to move into IVF because we already knew IUIs did not work for us. So in terms of the cost, so our costs are very different because it's partially covered by our health insurance. So we just paid the deductible for our health insurance, which, since I knew I was doing IVF, I made sure to get a very low deductible because it was just more cost effective. And then we also had to pay for the genetic testing, and that was $3,500 for every 6 embryos. So that was pretty pricey. And then our own medications, some of it the pharmacy coverage of the insurance covered, but not all of it. So all in all, for the 3 retrievals and the 1 embryo transfer, we paid about $15,000.
Which
that's
is on the
with
low
insurance,
side.
yes.
Yeah, it could be much, much more if that's not covered.
I would say generally you'd be looking at something like 20 to 25 at a minimum for a regular. So we had 3 retrievals, not just one. And so those retrievals are, so let me explain what happens with the retrieval. First of all, you take medications for like 2 weeks. You have multiple ultrasounds, like 4 to 6 ultrasounds during that time. And then when it's time for your retrieval, you're actually put under.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Because they put a needle up inside of you and retrieve the eggs one by one. So that was
how tedious for that doctor.
Yeah, especially because my doctor had to retrieve 50 eggs at once. So
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
I was there, I don't know what they called me, like super producer or something.
Look at you.
But unfortunately, the eggs, that's what they said. That's funny. But none of the eggs, or only 2 of the eggs ever fertilized, and only 1 of them was genetically normal. So that was the process. Now, the actual transfer process is much simpler because I'm awake. And the embryo's put in a little syringe and then just kind of injected in there, and that's it, everybody. And then we all listened to some Adele while it was happening. It was nice.
So it's not just the money even, it's also all the time that you have to, who knows if your job is going to be,
oh yeah,
comprehensive for that.
So I knew that I had a strong idea that I was going to be quitting my job, and I had a lot of sick leave. And so I was saving it up just in case we got pregnant, because I knew I would have to use sick leave as my parental leave because my job at the time did not offer parental leave. Yeah. So I used my sick leave for that because my transfers were actually very, very painful. The egg extraction for me, the recovery process was very, very difficult because I was an overproducer. My ovaries would go from the size of a kiwi to cantaloupe in 2 weeks, which, is as painful as you can imagine that it would be. And the recovery process was really difficult. So I ended up taking probably about 2 weeks off of work for every retrieval that I did.